Colonization has had a major effect on the world, both positive and negative. Of course, the people being colonized are often going to have a more negative view of the people coming in and declaring the land theirs. Societies want to have a say in what's happening in the place they call home, but usually, even if they don't like it, the locals don't have the power to do much about it. Sometimes, though, they muster the strength to fight for what's theirs. The Irish Rebellion of 1798 was a pivotal moment in Irish history, marking an intense period of insurgency against British rule. Fueled by a desire for independence and inspired by the revolutionary fervor sweeping across Europe, the uprising sought to establish a sovereign Irish republic. The political landscape of Ireland leading up to the rebellion was marked by a prolonged period of English dominion, which began to intensify in the mid-16th century as English governments sought to strengthen their control through policies of colonization. That colonization involved the plantation of Protestant settlers from England, Scotland, and Wales who were allocated land confiscated from the predominantly Catholic native population. The Protestant ascendancy was further cemented after the Battle of Boyne in 1691, which saw the defeat of King James II's supporters by forces of King William III. Despite having its own parliament in Dublin, Ireland was effectively under British control with significant restrictions on the legislative freedom of the Irish Parliament. The social dynamics of Ireland were characterized by stark economic disparities and widespread resentment among the Catholic peasantry towards their Protestant landlords. That resentment was exacerbated by brutal exploitation and the denial of civil rights to non-Anglican Protestant groups as well. The penal laws enacted during the late 17th and throughout the 18th century severely restricted Catholics, impacting their rights to education, bearing arms, and owning property. Those conditions fostered a growing movement for political change, influenced by the American War of Independence and the French Revolution, which highlighted the possibilities of overthrowing old regimes in favor of new democratic ideals. The colonists in North America were fighting for their independence from the British Crown in the late 18th century. That act of defiance, which would ultimately end in victory, was a major inspiration for the Irish. Not only did it inspire a revolution in Ireland, but it weakened British forces as they were busy fighting against the Patriot forces in America. That caused the Crown to replace the British soldiers in Ireland with volunteer militias made up of local Irishmen. While the British were preoccupied with the revolution in America, the volunteers were able to pressure the British Parliament to give legislative independence to the Dublin Parliament. When the Americans won the war, it gave the Irish hope that they too could break free from the grip of Great Britain, but that hope would only be strengthened by a similar struggle in France. The French Revolution had a profound impact on Irish political culture, reshaping the aspirations of many Irish revolutionaries. Wolfe Tone was born in Dublin in 1763 and was a central figure in the rebellion. Raised in the Church of Ireland, his vision was influenced by his mixed religious heritage and his early exposure to revolutionary ideas. Tone was deeply committed to the idea of a secular republic where Catholic and Protestant sit equal, a vision inspired by the democratic setups of the American Congress and the French National Assembly. Despite his personal reservations about the Catholic Church, which he viewed as an obstacle to revolutionary change, Tone advocated for the rights and inclusions of Catholics in the Irish political landscape to ensure a united front against English rule. Once the volunteers had secured legislative independence, they started laying the groundwork to create the Society of United Irishmen, which initially sought to end religious discrimination and later radicalized to aim for the overthrow of British rule. The association was established in October of 1791 at a meeting in a Belfast tavern. The founding members, including Wolfe Tone and former Army officer Thomas Russell, were primarily Presbyterians motivated by the principles of civil, political, and religious liberty. The society aimed to reform the government of Ireland to include all classes and religions under the ethos of liberty, equality, and fraternity. At the meeting, Tone said that, quote, "The weight of English influence in the government of this country is so great as to require a cordial union among all the people of Ireland, that the sole constitutional mode by which this influence can be opposed is by complete and radical reform of the representation of the people in Parliament." The organization, appealing across religious lines, quickly gained traction, claiming to have built up over 200,000 members by 1798. They saw rapid expansion, establishing chapters across Ireland, including Dublin, Armagh, and Limerick, advocating for radical reform through publications like their newspaper, the Northern Star. Under Tone's leadership, the Society of United Irishmen evolved from a group advocating parliamentary reform to a more radical organization seeking complete independence from British rule. By 1796, the Society had formed a secret army and was actively planning an insurrection, drawing the alarmed attention of the British government. Tone's effort to secure French military support were pivotal. He traveled to France to persuade the French leaders to aid the Irish cause, resulting in several planned military expeditions to Ireland. Although those efforts were largely unsuccessful, they demonstrated the serious threat the Society posed to British dominance in Ireland and marked a significant escalation in the fight for Irish independence. The United Irishmen, radicalized by their underground status and the failure of peaceful reform efforts, began to prepare for an armed insurrection. They formed an alliance with the militant Catholic group known as the Defenders, expanding their reach and military capabilities. By 1798, the United Irishmen had organized extensively and were ready to launch their rebellion, with plans to seize Dublin and prevent British reinforcements from entering the city. Despite being infiltrated by British spies who tipped off the government leading to preemptive countermeasures, the United Irishmen pressed forward with their plans for insurrection. In early 1798, the United Irish leadership felt sufficiently well organized and equipped to begin an insurgency without French assistance. The Viceroy in Ireland, Lord Camden, became increasingly pressured to crack down on the growing disorder and to arrest rebel leadership. Camden hesitated since he knew that the arrest would likely trigger an insurrection, but when the government learned that the Revolutionary Army had 250,000 men ready to fight for independence, they pushed for immediate action. It was discovered that leaders of the rebellion were planning to meet at a member's house on March 10th in Dublin, so Camden sent the authorities and almost the entire committee was arrested. During the capture, the prominent revolutionary leader Lord Edward Fitzgerald was fatally shot while resisting arrest. In response to the escalating threat of the rebellion, the British government declared martial law on March 30th, 1798. Under martial law, the military was granted extensive powers to control the population and suppress the rebellion. Regular troops, infantry militia, and mounted militiamen known as yeomen scoured the countryside in search of suspected rebels and hidden caches of weapons. Those forces were permitted to live at free quarters, forcibly lodging in civilian homes and requisitioning food and supplies as needed, leading to widespread looting and harsh punitive measures against the local population. The rebels had planned for the United Irish Army in Dublin to seize strategic points in the city on May 23rd, while the forces in the surrounding counties would throw up a cordon and advance into its center. As soon as those developments were signaled by halting mail coaches from the capital, the rest of the country was to rise. That plan was aborted due to the death of Fitzgerald on the 19th and because one of the members who was critical in the plan was arrested the morning of the 23rd. In Leinster to the south of Dublin, rebel forces were the first to carry out a full assault on a town under British control. On the evening of May 23rd, the Munster mail coach was attacked and destroyed on its approach to Naas. Not only that, but everyone on the train was hacked to death. That was the planned signal for the uprising to begin. Somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 men marched on the town at 2:30 a.m. on March 24th. Nos had the strongest garrison in the county, consisting of between 150 and 200 of the Armagh militia. The rebels were armed with pikes, but were no match for the militia's muskets and grape shot. Grape shot was a type of artillery that acted like a large version of a shotgun. It was a collection of metal balls wrapped in canvas and shot out of a cannon. Once fired, the canvas would disintegrate and the balls would spread out. When still wrapped up, the ammunition looked like a cluster of grapes, which is where it got its name. The militia's commander had 6 cabins and 6 houses, plus an inn and a community house destroyed to accommodate the cannon fire. The rebels had attacked the town from different directions, and the bulk of them almost reached the barracks but were dispersed. In all, around 30 were killed in the streets, with over 100 killed by the cavalry as they fled the town. The government forces lost 22 men. On May 27th, a militia force spotted a rebel force of about 4,000 to 5,000 men on a hill near Oulart. The rebel force was commanded by Father John Murphy, a Catholic priest who had become loyal to the United Irishmen. Underestimating the force's high ground advantage, the militia attacked but were quickly defeated by the rebels. The militia's commanding officer, Colonel Foote, and 4 soldiers were all that were able to escape. After the victory, almost all of North Wexford joined the rebellion. After taking control of the town of Wexford, rebels were able to release one of the United Irish leaders who had been arrested before the rebellion began. In the north, rebel leaders in Ulster had not received the signal as the plan to stop mail cars had failed in many areas. It wasn't until after learning of the fighting in Leinster that the United Irish leaders met to discuss a plan to move forward. Due to disagreements amongst the commanders, Henry Joe McCracken was put in charge and he began assembling men throughout the county. He proclaimed, quote, "The first year of liberty, 6th of June, 1798. On June 7th, McCracken and close to 10,000 men assembled outside Antrim ready to take over the town. Despite the men showing up, many had reservations about the battle and not all of them participated in the fight. Many laid down their arms and returned to their farms and families. At about 2 p.m., around 6,000 rebels advanced on Antrim. Prior to that, there had been about 200 cavalry with some local volunteers, but a delay in the rebel attack meant the garrison commander was able to request reinforcements. The militia forces that were there were able to set up at the base of Antrim Castle with artillery which immediately fired on the rebels as soon as they were in view. The battle was plagued with confusion and a number of bad decisions resulted from it. When the rebels retreated to take cover from the artillery, the cavalry thought that they were retreating completely, so they moved the artillery. When the rebels attacked the troops that were no longer protected by grape shot, those men retreated to the castle. A new group of rebel forces who were coming in from the other side of town mistook that for the troops attacking them, so they fled. In the resulting confusion, the commander of County Antrim, Lord John O'Neill, was left unguarded and was killed by rebel forces. When the reinforcements arrived from Belfast, there was widespread violence against the entire town. McCracken and his men eventually retreated and tried to regroup nearby. The defeat had devastating effects on the morale of the rebels, and their numbers dwindled over time. In Munster, the southwest area of Ireland, there were only 2 minor battles. The Battle of Big Cross took place on June 19th when a group of rebels attacked a detachment of militia while they were in transit. It's said that the rebels were outmatched and retreated. On June 24th, rebels attempted to free prisoners at 9 Mile House but were unsuccessful. Back in Leinster, the Battle of Carlow, a significant confrontation during the rebellion, occurred on May 25th. Rebel forces, made up of individuals from various parts of County Carlow and neighboring Queen's County, assembled in large numbers with the intent to attack British Crown forces from multiple directions. However, their plan quickly unraveled as they faced strong resistance. The rebels, joined by local Catholic inhabitants and others who had arrived secretly, initially seemed to have the upper hand. Tragically, as they relaxed after their apparent early success, they were caught off guard by concealed soldiers who unleashed a deadly barrage of gunfire. The ensuing chaos forced the rebels to flee, many of whom perished in the streets or were executed in the subsequent repression. The attack resulted in approximately 600 casualties, highlighting the brutal nature of the conflict. The battle at Vinegar Hill on June 21st stands as one of the most dramatic episodes of the rebellion. Approximately 16,000 United Irishmen, poorly armed and primarily equipped with pikes, faced a well-prepared force of 13,000 government troops. The battle commenced with an intense artillery bombardment, which was followed by direct infantry assaults. Despite fierce resistance and two major countercharges, the rebels were ultimately forced to retreat. The government forces used the tactical advantage of slower advancing columns to prevent a complete encirclement, allowing many rebels to escape, though many were also killed or captured. That battle marked the end of significant rebel control in Wexford, shifting the nature of the conflict towards guerrilla tactics. The British response to the rebellion was marked by severe and often brutal reprisal actions against the rebels and suspected sympathizers. Following the defeat at Vinegar Hill, yeoman units, particularly notorious for their harshness, engaged in savage retributions. Civilians wearing colored clothes which marked them as non-military were at risk of being summarily executed. The aftermath of the battle saw rampant looting, sexual assault, and murder, actions that were later condemned by the newly appointed Lord Lieutenant Marquis Cornwallis, who was dismayed by the lack of discipline and the extent of the atrocities committed by his forces. The severity of those actions were intended to deter further resistance, but instead often deepened the resolve of the Irish to resist British rule. The government's counterinsurgency campaign was equally ruthless, involving torture, summary executions, mass arrests, and the burning of houses to subdue and intimidate the population. The army and the militia, supported by the newly raised yeomanry, which consisted predominantly of loyalist Protestants, employed these extreme measures as part of their strategy to crush the rebellion. That approach not only aimed to eliminate the immediate threat, but also to prevent future uprisings by instilling a lasting fear amongst the Irish population. By July, just 2 months after the rebellion had begun, it was all but over. After the defeat at Vinegar Hill, Irish loyalists were punished in horrific fashion. Hundreds were beheaded with their heads placed on pikes for all to see. Father Murphy was captured in County Carlow, where he was stripped, flogged, hanged, and then beheaded. Then his body was burned in a barrel before his head was placed on a pike facing the local Catholic church. In August, it was thought that the rebellion would rise again as the French sent 1,100 men to aid in the revolution, but the force was quickly outnumbered and they surrendered. They were treated as prisoners of war, but any rebels who joined them were slaughtered. In the years before the rebellion, Wolfe Tone had been exiled from Ireland. He had spent time in the United States and then went to France. In September of 1798, Tone was on one of the French ships that made its way to Ireland to assist the rebellion. The ship he was on was defeated during the Battle of Tory Island off the northern coast of Ireland, and Tone was arrested. He was put on trial on November 8, 1798, where he defended his desire to separate Ireland from Great Britain in fair and open war, and his honor. He said, quote, "I entered into the service of the French Republic with the sole view of being useful to my country. To contend against British tyranny, I have braved the fatigues and terrors of the field of battle. I have sacrificed my comfort, have courted poverty, have left my wife unprotected and my children without a father. After all I have done for a sacred cause, death is no sacrifice. I know my fate, but I neither ask for pardon nor do I complain." Wolfe Tone was found guilty of treason and sentenced to be hanged. On the morning of his execution, he was found with a wound to his neck that is believed to have been self-inflicted. A doctor treated the wound, but Tone eventually died. The immediate aftermath of the rebellion was marked by widespread shock and devastation, with approximately 30,000 people dead and many more maimed, jailed, or exiled. That tumultuous period left hardly a family in certain parts of Ireland untouched by the tragedy. In regions such as Antrim and Down, a collective amnesia seemed to take hold as many distanced themselves from the rebellion, perhaps as a coping mechanism or due to the political climate of the time. The political landscape dramatically shifted when the Acts of Union were enacted in 1800, effectively abolishing the Irish Parliament. Ireland was then incorporated into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, which centralized governance in Westminster. That move was orchestrated by the British government as a response to the instability revealed by the rebellion and the achievement through significant manipulation, including the buying of votes. After the suppression of the rebellion by the British Crown, it was widely held in Ireland that the Wexford Rebellion was fueled by sectarian tensions between Catholics and Protestants. However, throughout the rebellion, prominent rebel leaders claimed that the rebellion was motivated by purely political reasons and not an issue of religion. Although some massacres that occurred throughout the duration of the rebellion do suggest sectarian tensions as motives, the fact that the United Irishmen were both Protestant and Catholic in addition to the republic formed in County Wexford suggests that this rebellion was indeed political. Grain prices collapsed in 1797 and 1798, in part due to the imposition of new taxes on the malt industry, causing hardship in many regions, but Wexford especially. Primarily, the rebels fought for a reform of legislature and the redistribution of political power. Despite the initial suppression of its goals, the rebellion significantly influenced Irish nationalism and the push for democratic reforms. It inspired various movements from the anti-slavery campaigns to the Irish National Land League and laid the groundwork for future insurgent tactics used by groups like the Irish Republican Brotherhood. The failure of the rebellion also prompted some nationalists to pursue peaceful reform, eventually leading to the Home Rule campaigns. Of course, the fight for an independent Ireland wouldn't stop then. The Irish Republican Brotherhood would form in 1858 and the Irish Volunteers in 1913. They would continue the campaign of independence in the early 20th century until the Irish Republican Army started a guerrilla war in 1919. That time, the Irish were able to overpower British forces, leading to the Anglo-Irish Treaty in 1921. The treaty established the Irish Free State and gave Northern Ireland, which had been created in 1920, the opportunity to opt out of the agreement, which it did. Even then, Northern Ireland would be plagued with violence over the choice to stay within the rule of Great Britain, leading to the Troubles lasting from the late 1960s to the early 2000s. Though the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, bringing peace to the region, tensions over government control will likely always persist. The memory of the 1798 rebellion and its commemorative practices have been utilized to serve various political agendas over the centuries. Revolutionary Republicans have often invoked the legacy of the United Irishmen to advance their causes, while constitutional nationalists have participated in commemorations to counterbalance their Republican counterparts. Wanting your people to be free of outside rule is not something that's hard to understand. You don't want your neighbor to barge into your house and tell you how to manage your family, and most people under the rule of a larger oppressive government feel the same. History has seen many countries obtain independence, from China in the 13th century to Kosovo less than a decade ago. The fight to retain control of your homeland seems to be never-ending, but necessary. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.